Welcome to Southgate Media Group's The Strain podcast, where we talk all about Guillermo del Toro's new horror fantasy series, The Strain, that airs on FX at 10/9 Central every Sunday night. I'm your host, Blair Knight Graves from ShowRatings.tv, and with me today is Kyle Tremblay, who's also from ShowRatings.tv. You can follow us on Twitter at BlairLovesTV, and that's Blair spelled with an E, and Kyle Loves TV. Also, you can follow this podcast Twitter handle at TheStrainPod. Hi, Kyle. How are you doing today?
Blair with an E, what's up?
Not a lot. Very excited to talk with you about The Strain.
I am. We're about 24 hours, not even 24 hours, after the premiere ended.
Yes.
So it's still fresh in our minds.
Yes. If we were in strain time, then this would be a pretty disastrous time. You don't know that yet because you're not on episode 2.
Wait, are you gonna spoil the podcast or spoil the show every episode? Is that what's gonna happen?
I promise not to.
Okay.
Well, I promise to try not to.
I don't think you can make that promise.
So for our listeners, if you have not, if you didn't hear our introductory episode from last week, the major difference between Kyle and I, as your podcast host for the Strain podcast, is that I've read the book series and he has not. So I've got a little insider knowledge, maybe a little bit, kind of.
It is the most significant difference between the two of us, I will say. Of all the things that our differing stances on having read the Strain book series is pretty much the biggest difference we have. So
yes. Otherwise, we both watched the series for the first time last night, and we're here to talk about it.
Absolutely.
So here we go. What did you think? I want to talk about that opening scene before we get into the episode as a whole, because the opening scene, was very much an epilogue. A prologue, I'm sorry.
Okay, I was working on that one.
Very much a prologue.
Thought I missed a time jump.
Of things to come. So, how did you feel about the opening scene?
Now, I referenced the opening scene. The episode was so long, I feel like I watched it like a year ago, even though it was like 22 hours ago. The opening scene, though, was the airplane, right?
Yes.
When the flight attendants hear a sound in the cargo hold, and then inexplicably, instead of waiting for the plane to land, decide to open the cargo hold and investigate during the flight.
Yes.
It's like,
yeah.
They had sensed there was danger, and yet instead of just sort of barricading it and waiting for landing, or you can, I don't know, call help, they just go right ahead, open it up, and not surprisingly, all hell breaks loose.
Well, I mean, I think their actions makes a little bit of sense. If somebody had brought a dog in the cargo hold or something along those lines, and it had gotten out, I mean, they were concerned that there was a living creature down there that was in need.
I feel like by the time they opened it, they had concluded that it was something menacing, whether it be a giant animal or something else. Something was up. It was a danger. It wasn't human, I think they could conclude, because there's no yelling. So it seemed like the prudent course of action to not open that mid-flight. And I do think that's something I'll get into later about the logic of the characters, which is, I think, a point of interest in this pilot. But having said that, I thought it was an effective scene. It was it reminded me a lot of the opening scene of Fringe.
Mm-hmm.
The very first scene of Fringe is a nearly identical sequence where a chemical is released on a plane that kills everybody on the flight, and the plane lands with everyone on it dead, and like half the episode is devoted to sort of investigating the plane and going in wearing hazmat suits. And so for like the first half of this marathon of an episode, all I could think about was the first episode of Fringe, because it was virtually identical.
That's interesting, because I've never seen Fringe, so I don't have that reference.
Yeah.
I know that when I read the books initially, that this was something that was very fresh to me. But I believe that these books would have come out, I think, in 2009, so probably around the same time that Fringe came out.
Yeah, I'm not implying that this is ripping off Fringe. I don't think Guillermo del Toro is watching Fringe. But I just think it's an interesting... It's a setup that's been used in a piece of popular culture before, in a recent piece of popular culture, and that didn't make it any less effective. I didn't. It's not a criticism. It's it was enjoyable and a good tension sequence. One of the many sort of classic horror sequences where you know something is bad is going to happen, but the people in the scene don't.
Yes, I thoroughly enjoyed the opening. I remember it was. I say this a lot when I talk to my friends about it, but the way that those books were written is they were so cinematic because they were written by a director.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
That makes sense.
so every scene that I was really counting on in this episode to be the way I had imagined it in my head was actually exactly as I'd imagined it in my head, just because it was so descriptive and so well laid out
Mm-hmm.
when I read the books. So this was one of those scenes where, and I'm not a truther or whatever those are. Like, I'm not obsessed with Game of Thrones the way the Game of Thrones people are.
Yeah. Yes.
I think that you need to change something. You can't translate something perfectly. But I was really excited about how well that plane scene went, as well as the whole Canary team boarding the plane. So basically, as we just discussed, a creature is on the plane and something horrible happens to everybody. And then the plane lands at JFK Airport and everybody is dead. And then chaos ensues.
Chaos.
uh,
Yeah.
there's crazy reporters everywhere. There's a government conspiracy. There's an old man who's talking to a guy with crazy eye slits.
I'm wondering. Okay, on the reporter angle,
Yes.
uh, does the CDC not have a PR person? Like, is the dude who literally was the first on the plane, the head of this Canary team? Is he really the right guy to be giving the press conference? Especially because, from what we've seen from him so far, he's kind of an ass.
Yeah. Yeah.
And probably the single least qualified person to be dealing with other people, based on the limited amount that I know about him. He seems like someone who I would never in a million years put in front of a microphone if I am a government organization.
I will say that Ephraim Goodweather, our protagonist, Dr. Ephraim Goodweather, is not the most likable of characters.
Yes.
He definitely suffers from the same syndrome that most male protagonists on television suffer from now.
Dr. Houseism?
Yes, Dr. Hassism. He's a little bit too smart to have any emotional connection to anybody around him.
Sure.
And he looks down on everybody around him as well.
This condition is also known as Don Draperitis. um,
Or Walter White disease.
sure. Yes. Although I think that technically was cancer, but
Oh boy.
sorry.
Yeah. So yeah, that's an interesting point that you bring up, though, is
Yeah.
that they stick a frame in front of the cameras to make him have to be sort of the scapegoat, maybe. And
I don't know. I think okay. I might as well get to it because I hinted to it in the first thing I said.
okay,
There is a lot of horror movie logic going on here. The characters in this pilot basically behave like teenagers in a Halloween movie.
oh,
Like there is when you peel back the superficial layer, there's a lot of behavior in this pilot that, like the guy going off on his own, what was he, like the head of the control room going off on his own to get killed because he's chasing some sound or something. Like, no,
Yeah.
maybe he was being compelled or something. Like, I don't fully understand the extent of what was happening.
so
Yeah.
he was being compelled. You heard a
Okay.
voice in his head. There was a voice in his head that maybe your volume wasn't up high enough.
Well, I didn't put together what was
Right.
going on there. I mean, there was
Right.
stuff happening, and I knew he was
Oh,
killing
yeah.
stuff others one. Either way, there's a lot of stuff regarding like the plots that were being undertaken, and just the sort of again the behavior of the people, to the fact that I guess Ephraim was,
Yeah.
I still don't know what I'm going to call him, Goodweather, I don't know, that he so brazenly ignored Abe, the pawn shop owner who literally knows everything. Which um,
But really, if you were a high-level CDC doctor, if a guy dressed as crazy as Abe is dressed
Sure.
walks up to you and tells with a cane with a wolf head on it, tells you, "I know the answers," you're not going to believe him. I wouldn't believe him.
well, he wasn't just saying I know the answers, he was saying specific details that no one else could have known. And listen, his partner kind of believed him, right? Was it Nora?
Nora, yes.
Yeah, she seemed like she kind of believed him. So I don't think the nobody would believe him argument flies because the only other person who heard him believed him. So, but either way, I mean, there's a lot of characters behaving in a way that sort of increases the tension. Kind of serves characters behaving more recklessly than I think um, would have than would have occurred in a non-horror movie.
Mhm.
But I also think that the show has a sense of it's making some kind of point about people behaving to the belief that they want to have, and how people want everything to be okay, and so they behave like it's okay. And I think that that's the in-world justification for why everyone is kind of acting recklessly, and why the government isn't like why nobody seems to recognize that this is a major threat except the old pawn shop owner, and why just everything's kind of slow. You know, why the bad guys seem to be far ahead in this episode.
Yes.
Um, and so there's sort of a continuum there where it's like horror movie logic, but also there is some kind of broader point being made.
So,
Yeah.
so you sound like you might have been a little bit unhappy with the pilot.
No,
Was there a sense that there's things you didn't like?
I think, and I wrote a review of this, I should say, for showratings.tv. You could read my thoughts. I put them all on paper. Um, I would say
Or
that,
on the web, as it were.
well, on virtual paper, e-paper. I'm, yeah. As a citizen of the internet, I publish everything online. No,
Yes.
um, no. I think I enjoyed it. I should get that out of the way first. I enjoyed this pilot. I thought it was a good episode. I think it effectively introduced the world, its characters, what's going to happen. I don't think it was a great episode of television, and I think my biggest disappointment is that it's a little dumber than I thought it would be. It's a little bit. It's just like there was, and I pointed this out in my review. There were early in the episode where Ephraim gives a speech about how deadly diseases are, which is just like right out of like that's a speech that like Nicolas Cage would give in The Rock. In fact, I think he did give that speech in The Rock. Like that's like an action movie speech, and that's
Right.
fine. I love action movies, and I love horror movies, and I love dumb horror movies. So again, it's not affecting my enjoyment. But I was kind of hoping the show would be a little smarter in the dialogue and a little just. And I mean, again, it's the pilot. It could be a lot of different things, but just from what I saw from this, it's closer to pulp than I was expecting it to be. Um,
I
yeah.
actually, I'll agree with you there 100%.
Oh, good.
Because as I mentioned before, having read the books, I mean, it's not the most eloquently written book. I won't like.
Yeah.
There's not some beautiful prose within those pages, but it's an effective book. As I said, it's very cinematic,
Yes.
and I felt terrified throughout reading the entire series. Especially the first book, I think, was the scariest of all of them. But that's mostly because you don't know the world yet.
Right.
And I was also surprised at how much the characters had to explain things to the audience. And I don't know if that has anything to do with the network that it's on, or if that has something to do with the fact that, not everybody is sciencey, and we're talking about sciencey things, so we might as well make it dumb science. Like,
Yeah. I think
like
I think an
there's
hour
just
40 minutes was a lot for this pilot. I think
yeah,
that's a hefty runtime
yes.
for an episode, and I think maybe they took that thinking they could explain everything a little bit better. But honestly, I don't know if it needed that.
No, I don't either. I think that it certainly could have been condensed into 1 hour, and I probably would have enjoyed it more.
It's a little bit, go a little bit over.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
an hour 40 is basically 2 episodes.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I agree with you though that the way that the characters behaved at the climax of the episode when the ME is examining the bodies and
Yes.
he gets a parasite stuck in him, when people behave that way, when he's been told to where have extra precautions, and he's not.
Right. Yeah.
Like,
Right.
and the reckless walking away, even though he was being compelled, it's still. I agree, it wasn't fully clear.
I mean, you really go off on your own in that situation. Like, there's
Right.
something's going on. You're hearing
Right.
weird voices. Things are happening.
Right.
Is walking like a mile away from everybody else really your best call at that point?
Right.
You know?
And I also felt that there are multiple protagonists in this show. Ephraim is the head of the show, but the way that these characters were all introduced, I thought that weren't Ephraim was kind of sloppy. Like, when Gus holds up Abraham at the beginning of the episode, he's the Latino man, and he's with his friend, and he tries to rob the pawn shop that Abe runs, and he fails at it.
Wait, was that? Oh, that was Gus. Okay,
That was Gus.
Because it was his friend. It was his friend who tried to reach for the money.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
But Gus was there.
Gotcha.
And Gus is one of the most important characters. Is going to be one of the most important characters in this series.
No spoilers, Blair.
Sorry, is that a huge spoiler?
I don't think it is.
No, well, because by the end of it, you got the sense that he was on a mission. He was sent. He was given cash to deliver the box
Right, yes.
to the other side of the river. But I don't feel that you're given any reason really to sympathize with him, even though they try to get you to, like, oh, his mom and his brother, there's some issues there. I don't think that I cared for him at all.
Oh, well, he's a bad guy as far as I know. He's a bad guy. He's a negative. He's part of Team Evil.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean that's clearly, along with the glasses guy from I don't know, the CDC or something, who was
Jim Kent.
Yeah, who helped him out.
Yeah.
Yeah, like those are the bad guys, and they're
right.
Yeah, so yeah.
Well, and Jim Kent also is going to play a prominent role. Obviously, it's Sean Astin. You're not going to get Sean Astin to play like a really quick character.
No. Right.
And the same thing with his son Zach and Abe. Like, Abe, you spent a little bit of time with. There's all these characters, and I feel like the only one who you're really meant to follow is F, which is fine if that's the way that they're going to play it by the TV show. But F's not incredibly likable yet.
Yeah.
Everybody's given some corny dialogue, and you don't really know who you're supposed to be rooting for because he's not likable. And I think that's one of the ways that the pilot failed a little bit. But in the ways that the pilot succeeded, I thought when it did use horror, it used it very effectively. And I was scared when the creatures rose up in the medical examiner's office or in the morgue. And I was scared throughout all of the CDC parts, where they're going and doing all their sciencey things. And it set up a mystery, and it's a mystery that I'm excited to see unfold in this way. How did you feel about the horror of the pilot?
I thought the horror was effective. I wasn't necessarily scared. I think I have a thing where, like, seeing a mysterious coffin that just shows up doesn't really do it for me. Like, and again, like, all the horror scenes were very well done, but they were also horror scenes that we've seen before. Like, there's the Emmy at the end when the big climactic moment when all the bodies he's been working on rise up and come to life again. Like, everyone saw that coming. Like, you don't have to have read the books to know what was happening there.
Right.
That's a straightforward zombie scene.
Right.
and it's done really well, but nothing in this was surprising.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm much more scared by your average episode of Hannibal, for example, than anything here. But that's not to say it wasn't effective, because I enjoy the tension of it, if I'm even if it's not frightening. And there was one. I mean, I kind of appreciate that they really didn't go for, like, major jump scares. Like, it wasn't cheap scares. Right. It was very atmospheric, and it wasn't just setting everything up for a big boo moment. It was the scare was intended to come from just the scene itself. I think it would have helped if I cared about these characters at all yet. And it's the pilot episode, so of course I'm not going to care about them. Um, but I think had I known had I had any context for all these horror sequences and known these characters and cared about hopefully some of them, they would have been a little more effective in terms of scaring me. But overall, still, I thought it was really well done, and obviously beautifully shot.
Oh
And
gosh.
the episode, I mean, the episode looked absolutely gorgeous. So
Yes. Yeah, no, that was one thing. I think you said atmosphere, which I think was the most important aspect of the entire pilot. It was setting up the world and setting up the atmosphere, giving you a sense of this is what life is like right now.
yeah,
And we all know this is an apocalypse story. So this is what life is like right now.
right.
You know that life is not going to stay this way. And you get that a little bit when the phone stopped working at the end of the episode, and the lines were all jammed up, and the little girl comes home and she's all zombified.
Yes.
Which very effective ending, I thought.
Yeah, again, easy to see coming from a mile away. There's no surprise to that. I mean, as soon as she walks in, you kind of know what's happening. I loved the end voiceover explaining that because it was from the perspective of, I guess, the bad guy. I don't know who that is, but someone old and bad who is explaining that they're going to conquer us by taking advantage of our love of one another, and showing the father accept his daughter back, even though any rational person would say, like, something's like, why is she here? There's no logical reason for her to be here. But in that case, the lack of rationality makes sense because it's his daughter, and we know he loves his daughter, and of course he wants to believe the best about his daughter. And that's what I was saying with the sort of continuum where his decision to sort of unquestionably welcome back his daughter is an irrational decision that I accept logically because I understand how he could feel that way. And I think that was really effective and effectively paired with that voiceover sort of ominously hinting that this is clearly their plan. They're banking on this kind of emotional connection trumping rational reason.
Yes. Which, yeah, going forward it's going to be an interesting ride to see how that is executed.
Yes, that's the thing I'm most interested about. I want to see how it happens. I know that at some point we're going to enter into the apocalypse, but I like the. I'm always interested in the mechanics. Like how are the vampires going to take things over? So that's the most interesting part of this for me.
Well, speaking of the vampires, let's talk about the creatures in the pilot.
Yeah.
What did you think? I was blown away by the cloaked figure.
Yes.
It was very, very Guillermo del Toro.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Screamed it. But when he stood in all of his mighty presence, that was a moment that was very terrifying for me. And even though, like, you knew pretty clearly that that individual was going to die in that moment, I don't think you could have expected what came out of that creature.
Yeah. No, I mean, the specifics of it were certainly very Guillermo del Toro. Just, weird and specific, and I think that's one of the best aspects of this pilot, and it's something I'm going to be interested in going forward because Guillermo del Toro did not direct subsequent episodes. No. I think he came back and directed like the last of the season or something. I heard. I don't know if that's true or not, but we're gonna go through a stretch here where he's not directing the episodes, and I feel like possibly the best aspect of this pilot is weird stuff like that. Weird, memorable little details that separate this from being just sort of stock horror stuff. And so I thought that was really good and memorable, and enjoyed that. And quick question: what yes. I called it a robed specter because I don't know what else to call it. Why? Okay, so he something pops out of his mouth or something, and it like sucks the life out of this dude's neck. Like yes. Things have gone bad. The robed specter then snaps his neck like a ninja. It's like he's probably already dead. And then he smashes his head in on the ground for good measure. I feel like the first action killed him, the head smashing I understand. The neck snapping, just overkill, man. Just real like man, just really making sure, I guess, or showing off. I don't know what's going on there.
Well, did you gather any of that information from Abe in the airport yelling at F about why it's so important to destroy the heads?
He said you have to destroy the heads and burn the bodies.
Yes.
I didn't.
Okay, so in general vampire lore, especially from Europe, if you don't take off the head or burn the body, it's going to come back to life.
Okay, sure.
No matter what.
That makes sense.
So if that creature was just feeding for the sake of feeding, then it probably, and it didn't want that individual to come back to life, then it would go ahead and smash the head. The other thing that's important, though, is that instrument that came out of him, that organ that came out of him,
Yes.
is the way that he feeds. And
Sure.
that came out of him, you can anticipate that that's also probably the delivery mechanism for those parasites,
Sure.
which have now infected all of the people that he fed on in the plane, because they all have the same mark on their necks.
Right. Well, those were the people in the morgue, right, at the end who
Yes.
got up. Yeah. Okay. Sure.
Yeah. So they had all been infected with the parasites through that.
How did he infect? Oh, maybe. Well, this. I'm not gonna ask. I'm not gonna lead you into a spoiler, but because yeah, that's like that was the sort of mystery of this episode, which is that this plane full of people who appear with the naked eye to be unharmed, just dead. And that was the sort of mystery of this, and then it slowly revealed that they are actually harmed and weird stuff is happening. Yeah, I buy all that. I'm fine with the mechanics of all this. Like so far I'm not the kind to like take major issue with like, oh, this isn't realistic or anything like that. Like as long as it's consistent within the world of the show, I'm good with it. So everything from that perspective is fine by me.
What did you think of the creatures themselves when they woke up in the morgue? Did you? I didn't. I was a little disappointed. I was a little. I don't know about you.
It was just like a Walking Dead thing. It was no more or less impressive than when the zombies were on The Walking Dead. A little bit of makeup and. I figure like we've already seen the cloaked figure, so there's clearly other stuff going on here. But yeah, I don't know if I had any expectations for what they looked like, but they didn't look completely off to me in any way.
I just had the expectation because I saw them. You see them attack, and you see that the organ also comes out of them, but you only kind of see it a little bit.
I didn't even pick that up.
Yeah, they're doing it now too.
Okay.
And that's why I'm disappointed, and I'm saying this because I saw it, not because of any prior knowledge, because they had the same instrument that he has in his body, and they attacked that man in the same manner, and it was barely there. And that is what is going to be so scary.
Yeah, right.
is these extra organs, and I was upset about that.
Well, they could definitely do it in the second or third episode, right?
Yes.
Yeah, but to me, it just looked like a zombie attack, basically. Like he's just being eaten. Like I didn't pick up any vampire specifics.
Right, which is why that scene was really cool. Like Sweet Caroline is going on in the background, and that was really fun. And the guy is scrambling to get the little parasites out from under him. But yeah, it was so classic. It was so stereotypical. I would have much rather him have been in the UV light room, stuck with one of them, and one of them ate him.
I was gonna say it would have been scarier with only one.
Yes.
The group of them made it so that it was just like a mob. It would have been if he had gotten locked in with one or something, and we had really seen how it happened. I think that's where it would have been gross and scary, and all that stuff.
Yeah. So obviously this episode was a little bit longer than the rest of the episodes will be. What did you think of the pacing of it in general? I think we talked about that a little bit. Like the mystery was kind of cool, but yeah. I thought it took a while to pick up.
Yeah, and I wrote that in my review. It started a little slow, and I thought the execution was effective but not efficient. Mm-hmm. I think that they definitely it does feel like a pilot where the network had a lot of stakes in it, because there's a lot, like, again, like that moment which I thought was really bad where Ephraim delivers the speech about diseases and stuff. Like, that feels like almost pandering to the audience to try to hey guys, this is an action movie, like, hey, this is like, there were moments like that. And like, I mean, I liked all the tension sequences, but there were a lot of them. And I just feel like they basically packed this pilot in an attempt to get viewers. Which I mean, most shows do. There's nothing wrong with that. Most shows don't extend it to an hour and 40 minutes.
Right.
Again, we both agree it probably could have been shorter, and they could have cut some of the stuff and moved it to other episodes. Yeah, but I mean, overall, I thought it was fine. I thought it moved once it got going. They kept squarely focused on the sort of issue at hand, which I think is important. One of my concerns is we got a little bit of a family therapy scene, and I'm a little bit concerned that we're going to go down that path. Not that we can't develop that relationship in those characters, but that we seem to have a wife whose only character trait that we know from this pilot is that she is upset that her husband works too much and is too devoted to her work, and based on the little bit we've seen about his personality, she has every right to be. But that's the kind of obnoxious character that exists in a lot of sort of action sci-fi horror movies.
Yeah.
You know, the nagging wife.
Yes.
And we might it feels like we might be going down that path, or their precocious child. We might be going down that path as well. Like, the family seemed very two-dimensional to me, and I'm a little bit worried that we're going to get into a situation where we have, zombie apocalypse, chases, vampire worms, decapitations, followed by 5 minutes of family drama. And that will just, I already know that won't be effective. Based on everything in this pilot, that will not be effective. Like, if they're going to have family drama, and it certainly looks like they are, it's going to have to be really smartly inserted into these episodes to make it not feel like an intermission between vampire apocalypse scenes.
So it sounds to me like you had you said in our introductory episode of this podcast that you had the fear that this might be much like The Walking Dead. Is that what your concern is also based on? Does this feel a little too much like The Walking Dead to you?
It actually is the opposite, because one of the problems with The Walking Dead is that all the characters feel like they were constructed to be on this show for a while and then get eaten. Like, they all feel like they feel like one of those Hollywood towns where every house is like a wooden cutout. That's almost all the characters in The Walking Dead. Like, you have no sense that they existed prior to their first appearance on the show. Mm-hmm. And so I think what The Strain is attempting to do is flesh out this character a little more. Like Ephraim Goodweather is not someone who just came into play when vampire stuff started going down. He's someone who has a life, and who, prior to this series, had a relationship with his wife and has a kid and like all this stuff. And it's admirable in a way, but boy, do they need to nail it. The writing needs to be smart. The characters need to be likable, and you have to be able to root for them and understand things from their perspective. It can't always be from his perspective if he's going to have arguments with his wife. Because if it is, then we're going to hate her the same way that Breaking Bad fans hate Skylar White.
Right.
So, yeah.
And the same problem with Nora. We immediately saw that with Nora, that he discounted her what she had to say multiple times throughout the episode, even though she was always right.
Yes, exactly. Right. She seemed like the only character in this entire thing with a level head.
Yeah.
And was summarily ignored. And it would seem like the show would be a little more pleasing if she was the main character. And it's so interesting that you mentioned earlier that the book shifts the perspective of the characters, right?
Yes.
Book.
Yeah.
And that's what this pilot could have used, the way that Game of Thrones shifts the perspective.
Yes.
Because this, like you said, yeah, I'm now coming around to your point that all of this was from Ephraim Goodweather's perspective. I still don't know what to call him. One of these podcast episodes I'll figure it out. But it was all from his perspective, which is, a sort of know-it-all-y, and also, like, recklessly irresponsible perspective of someone who doesn't recognize the threat that's happening as well as his assistant or whoever she is, his second in
She's
command.
Yeah, she's second in command. She's
Second,
his colleague.
right.
She's almost, she's just if he's the director, she is the coordinator. I'm not sure sure what would
Like
be
the
the
vice president to his president or something.
yeah,
Like
exactly. That's exactly what she is in their department.
yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, but it would have been interesting to shift to her perspective and see things from there. And like if we're gonna have so basically if we're gonna have these family scenes, we're gonna need to see the family, and it's going to have to not just be in the context of their hampering Ephraim's attempts to do his job. Because
Yeah.
that's how they were used in this pilot. They hampered his attempts to do his job, and
Yeah,
that's a negative.
and I definitely think that if the series, I mean, you obviously followed other characters. You did not just exclusively follow Ephraim's character,
Right.
but I feel like you got the sense as a viewer that he was the person you were supposed to be following. Because you can definitely, there were perspective parts of the episode. You had Abe's perspective. You definitely had F's perspective. You had Jim Kent's perspective. You had Gus's perspective. But all of that felt like it was supposed to circle around and come to F at the end, as opposed to it being, okay, this is Gus's moment, and this is exclusively about his character.
Right. Ephraim is the center of the universe of the show.
Yeah.
And everything orbits around him and comes into contact with him. Like Abe specifically, which seemed like an entirely separate chain of events, but then by the end of the episode he's yelling at him in an airport.
Yes.
So that's like the example. Like everything is coming back to the main character. And again, I don't know, is Ephraim and are Ephraim and Nora the only two members of the CDC? Like, there's no one else there to like take a statement from Abe. Like, why is he being brought to the head? The guy who is doing the press conference and who was the first on the plane. Ephraim is basically Jack Bauer in this episode. Like,
oh no, don't say that. You'll make me so unhappy.
He's doing everything. It's like it's the same as CTU in 24, where it's like you have these two people and they are doing the work of 40. I mean, again, like that's okay. TV shows do that, but you know.
Jim, you may not have picked it up. Sean Astin's character is a member of the CDC.
Oh, is he?
Yeah, he's supposed to kind of be their boss. Yeah, I know you didn't
Not
get
even
that.
Close.
Yeah, he's the George Mason.
Sure, okay, yeah, gotcha.
Oh goodness, 24 references.
Yeah.
Why am I doing this to myself? So yeah, there were at least 3 members of the CDC on site. What was the other government agency where the dumb guy walked around and like got his head smashed? Were they National Security? Is that what they were? They were like, we should go in first.
But he was in the flight control tower.
Okay,
And
right.
So that was just the airport people.
Right.
That was employees of JFK Airport. Still, by the way, the employees are still handling the luggage. 200 people are donezo. And the employees of the airport are handling the luggage, not, I don't know, the FBI. Why are they the ones in the warehouse? Why aren't they, like, being shuffled away?
Right. No, I completely agree with you. There was a lot of logic that
it's thin. It's paper thin. The sort of justifications for getting the characters into the scenes that they need to be in to advance the narrative. Again, totally fine, not a problem, but also a little disappointing that this sort of played like it played like Halloween to me. Like it's all this Deus Ex Machina to get us to the scene that they want to get us to.
Yes.
So
we've brought up Fringe and 24 and Halloween. Is there anything else that if you were going to kind of put the pilot, just the pilot in a category, is there any other show that you would compare it to, or movie for that matter? I mean, obviously it had a very Guillermo del Toro feel. I feel like many of his films, which are the same length as this pilot, have had far more depth.
Yeah.
So I will admit that was a little disappointing, but of course, there's the big, huge difference between having only an hour and 40 minutes to tell a story and having an hour and 40 minutes to introduce a story. But so is there any film or TV show that you would compare this to give people who haven't watched the episode yet? I mean, now they've learned everything from us. But,
sure. Covered it all.
To give them a sense of what it felt like.
I think the comparison that has to be made, that FX itself, if not overtly making, is clearly implying, is The Walking Dead. The show exists to kill The Walking Dead. That's
Yes.
why the show is on the air. That's why this show is being given a Sunday night time slot and a ton of promotion by FX, and that's why I read they spent $500,000 to develop the vampires, like just to do the look of the vampires cost them $500,000. Like this is the biggest swing FX has ever taken, and it's because they want to take down The Walking Dead. And I wrote about this in my review, and that the sort of battle between these two shows is going to be fought both in critics' eyes and in terms of Nielsen ratings, and it's going to be a long-term battle. It's not going to be one episode, and so there's plenty of time for that power dynamic to shift. But I mean, I don't really have a scorecard yet. You know, I want to wait more episodes to make a substantive comparison to The Walking Dead. But that is the show where the comparisons are going to be made for the years to come. That's where we're at.
I definitely, I'm right there with you. I will say, and I kind of hate myself for thinking this and now saying it. I thought that the pilot of The Walking Dead was one of the most effective pilots in television ever.
Well, I wrote in my review, it's one of the greatest things on TV this decade.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, The Walking Dead pilot is a masterpiece.
Yes.
And I mean, again, I do not like that show. But
No, and I quit that show after. Well, I watched the whole first season, but I stand strong that the first 3 episodes were the only watchable episodes of that show.
Yeah.
They were incredibly compelling, and there was a lot of character work done, and the world just fell apart so quickly. And I think that the probably that's actually where I'm landing. The biggest difference between the Walking Dead pilot and the Strain pilot, obviously, they're completely different categories of monster, even though they both have zombie type things going on. That the world fell apart so quickly in The Walking Dead that the stakes were so high.
Yes.
And in the Strain, this is an apocalypse story. I have to keep reminding everybody this, like, really, like, the world will fall apart. That's not a spoiler. Like, it's about the apocalypse.
No, I mean, I think people know.
You can read that on Wikipedia.
They're not gonna like go, oh hey, job done.
Yeah.
You know, this isn't heading towards like a quick conclusion.
Right, exactly. So when the apocalypse does happen, the only thing that I can hope is that this sort of slow, a little bit of a rocky start with the Strain is that it's all going to be worth it when the apocalypse does come down, because the stakes are super high. And I got that way. That was way more effective in The Walking Dead.
Yeah, what was so interesting with The Walking Dead, because I remember watching that at the time and reading the discussions surrounding the show when it premiered. And it's silly to think now that it's the biggest show in all TV and a monster and in a category of its own in terms of popularity. When it premiered, most people thought it was going to fail, including the people who made it. And it was a 6-episode first season, and they burned through basically all their best material in 6 episodes because everyone thought the show was done. And even before the first one aired. And then it got massive ratings, and I'm sure they regretted using just torching tons and tons of material. And so I think The Strain is entering with the expectation that the show is going to be on for 5 seasons. And as such is pacing itself with that in mind, which is a logical decision and a practical decision, but might not be a good decision, because I feel like some of the best TV comes from the idea that you're throwing everything at the wall and you'll figure it out later. And there are books, I mean, you know, obviously, so this is sort of a Game of Thrones situation where you sort of have a track, a track has been laid, and you know the end point. So it's a little bit different. But I know, like, the best seasons of Breaking Bad, or the best season of Breaking Bad, well, I should say all the seasons of Breaking Bad were really good after the first one, but I remember Vince Gilligan, the creator of Breaking Bad, saying, like, I used all my ideas this season. We're going to go in the writer's room afterwards and we're going to come up with new stuff. And Matt Weiner, running Mad Men, said that before this season, that the end of this season of Mad Men was supposed to be the end of next season, but he decided to use his material and then come up with whatever would happen afterwards later. And that's the sense with the strain is the opposite, which is that they have a very deliberate track that they're heading on, a very specific plan, and so I think it does, on the negative side, it prevents the show from having a like eye-popping debut like The Walking Dead had. But on the positive side, hopefully it won't run out of material after 3 episodes like The Walking Dead did.
Yes.
So I mean, for now, it certainly wasn't as impressive as The Walking Dead's debut, but there's a good reason for that, and this is a very much a marathon, not a sprint. And if the strain can sustain itself over the course of a season, it will already have done better than The Walking Dead ever has.
Yeah.
So you know, got to keep that in mind.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm right there with you. I want to cover one more thing.
Okay.
I want to ask you, I know that what convinced you to watch this pilot was that Corey Stoll was going to be playing the main character.
Yeah.
And I think we've gone around it a little bit, that, you know, his character has been a little bit problematic in the pilot. Do you feel, I mean, obviously you feel that his monologue was definitely overbearing,
Not his fault though.
Not his fault. Yeah, that's where I'm going.
Yeah.
Is do you think that there's still so much potential within his performance to make that character likable, or do you think that character, the way that it's
Hold on. I thought you were going to say you think that character, the wig, because the wig is not helping things.
No.
Listen, we all know that Corey Stoll is a bald man. I don't understand why in 2014 the lead of the show could not have been bald.
Yeah.
I weirdly think that would have made him more likable. I think the hair is hurting, and the fact that it is obviously a wig is hurting even more. So it could be a lot of these issues are directly related to the wig situation going on, and I do not understand why it was written that way, or why that decision was made to give him hair like that. Like, again, you got Corey Stoll, like, let him be him. You don't need to distract from that performance.
I think it's a sloppy attempt to try to make the characters look the way, and I'll say this, make them look too much like they are in the books, because Corey Stoll doesn't look anything like F should look.
No, he doesn't need to.
And he doesn't need to, and that's fine. Yeah. So don't keep trying to make him that way.
Yeah, characters are characters. You know, they're and again, like, the book that's a character can be a character, not look like the way the character was described in the literature. You know,
exactly.
He can embody the character.
Well, and so, you know, this is something that happened on Game of Thrones too, though. In the first season, Daenerys' wig was awful. Like, it's bad. If you go back and watch that compared to how it looks now. So, you know, it's, again, the problem of trying too hard. Yeah, you're trying too hard to make the translation perfect. But so hopefully the wig will get better.
Yeah, hopefully at some point he just loses his hair. They write it, his hair catches on fire, he loses it, and he's bald the rest of the show. Well, no more problems.
Or he totally stresses out because of the apocalypse, and it just starts falling out in mass.
Right, but aside from hair related issues, hard to pull myself away from them. But yeah, I think he's going to be a very good lead of this show, and I think he's very qualified, and he is going to lend a gravity that the show desperately needs to sell what it's trying to sell, which is the big thing here. And actually, a comparison I'll draw. You asked for comparisons earlier. Last week I also reviewed Extant, the CBS sci-fi premiere.
Oh, with Halle Berry, right?
Yes, and that show was very good, and it was good in a large part because Halle Berry sold the material, and there is something about having someone who is not just a name with Halle Berry, but someone who's a real actor.
Yeah, she's absolutely a true performer.
A real actor, and Corey Stoll is a real actor too. And having someone like that at the center of your show especially if your show is kind of campy sci-fi, is just what the doctor ordered for that kind of thing, because it's like hiring a British actor.
Right.
When you need to give some exposition, give it to a British actor who can read it in like a frumpy accent, because I mean, again, if you don't nail that role, and this happened with Tyrant, where the lead is stiff as a board and generally terrible, and any gravity that show has, any point it's trying to make just gets lost and swallowed up, and all the other problems come to the forefront. Tyrant isn't a sci-fi show, but it is a show that's set in a sort of foreign world, basically, a fake Middle Eastern nation. So it's half a world away. This is again like we're trying to sell an entirely different world with the strain. So you want to anchor it around someone, and I think he's a good person to anchor it around.
Yeah, I think in general, having looked at the rest of the cast, obviously we talked about Sean Astin, and then you've got Kevin Durand, who wasn't introduced yet, but his character wasn't introduced yet, but he's a phenomenal actor. And I'm trying to remember who played.
The guy playing Abe is a big time actor.
Oh yeah, David Bradley.
Yes.
Yeah, who's known from Game of Thrones.
Of course.
In general, I think we have a pretty great cast, and I think that we can rely on them to make the material good. We just have to wait it out until the second episode. But also, let's be, as I said before, and I just want to end on this thought. This is an apocalypse story that, unlike The Walking Dead, the apocalypse didn't happen in the first episode.
Yes.
So we as the viewers don't know how high the stakes are yet. We don't know how bad everything is going to become. We know that the cell towers are jammed, and we know that the vampires are out. But that's all that we've got.
We are in the prologue of the story.
Yes,
now.
that's exactly.
Yes, the event hasn't happened yet. We're in the prologue, and that is definitely a different situation to be in. And it certainly speaks to the confidence that FX has that we're pacing it this way. And hopefully it'll pay off, because we're going to go into, when we do get to that event, we're going to have a lot more context for it than we did in, say, The Walking Dead.
Yes. So we can only hope, and we're going to come back next week, and we're going to discuss what happens in night 2.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
How can people keep up with you, Kyle?
Oh, they can follow me at Kyle Loves TV on Twitter. I'll be live tweeting Under the Dome tonight, another very similar sci-fi show. And that's a joke.
Ooh, you just hurt my heart. Ooh.
No, that was meant entirely facetiously.
Okay.
And they can read my writing at showratings.tv.
Yeah, and Kyle will be covering The Strain this season on showratings.tv.
Read my review of episode 1 and disagree with me.
Yeah. There's a handy little comment section, and there's the ability to go and rate and review the episode yourself on our website.
I gave it, for reference, I gave it an 8.6 out of 10, which is a pretty good rating for me.
That is a pretty good rating for you. You're pretty stingy with your high ratings.
I am. So far, so good.
Good. All right. Well, this wraps up our second episode of the Strain podcast. Before we go, I want to mention a few things. You can download and subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. You can also hear all our shows at our website, southgatemediagroup.com. Please subscribe to this show and also rate us. Follow the show on Twitter, the podcast show on Twitter at @TheStrainPod, and Kyle and I at Blair Loves TV, BLAIRE, and at Kyle Loves TV. Check out our website, showratings.tv, to rate and review The Strain every week, as well as all of your other favorite shows. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.
If you would like to donate to help pay for this and other Southgate Media Group podcasts, simply go to our website, southgatemediagroup.com, and click on the donate button. It can be as little as $1 or, as much as you want. Help keep this fun going by supporting this and our other shows. Thanks again for listening, everyone. You're the best fans in the world.